is Amanda Clayton, and I work with personalized and blended learning for the district. And I'll let Jenny introduce herself.
And my name is Jenny Conrad, and I am a digital learning coordinator, and I mainly work with central services.
And so this morning we'll take a look at 4 pillars of personalized learning that have been identified by the state and how they might apply to school leadership. Before we get started, we have a few reminders for you.
So you are watching this live with us today, and this will be posted for asynchronous viewing as well. So if people are interested in following up later, they will have that ability with the Canvas course. So in the Canvas course, you'll find a few different things. So you found the Meet link today. We will also have a recorded session there. You'll notice a feedback form, and that's for us to get feedback on things moving forward as far as like what would be good for APs and what you liked and what you didn't. You'll also notice that there is a reflection. If you complete the reflection, you'll get 0.1 CEUs for every session you complete, and that is both synchronously and asynchronously. So if you had another one during this session that you wanted to go back and watch the recording and then complete the reflection afterwards, you could do that and get credit for that as well. And the credit will be awarded after March 31st when this whole session closes. So we'll take the attendance from Canvas and put it in Wake Learns. And that is sort of a walkthrough of the Canvas course and where you can go from here.
So just as a reminder, there are 5 North Carolina digital learning competencies for leaders. And this session is going to focus particularly on content and instruction. So that's the competency that relates most closely to the pillars of personalized learning. So today we'll take a look, we'll explore the pillars of personalized learning that are identified in the Every Student Succeeds Act for the state. And then we'll consider how those can inform a school's vision for teaching and learning.
So we have this video here. What it does a good job of doing is hearing the students' voices and how they feel about personalized learning in their school. And it gives a few examples of how it's done in this one specific school. So that may be something you want to follow up with later. And if you're watching asynchronously, go ahead and press play on that video. To get started today, we are going to do sort of a read through of some quotes from some experts on personalized learning. So if you would take a few minutes and click on that quotes and references, I can drop that link to you in the chat. And choose some, and then in a few minutes we will pause and come back and discuss what you learned from these quotes and go from there. I know you may not have had a lot of time to read all of the quotes, and that's okay. But of the quotes that you did read, what implications do you think this has for our work, and how do you see the overlap between pre-COVID and this concurrent learning situation with the pillars of personalized learning?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of quotes, but I'm hoping with this shows that education at least can move into that more personalized mode. I think there was definitely lots of teachers and educators out there that were doing that pre-COVID, but there was definitely limitations that they couldn't see past. And this has allowed to say, oh wait, there are ways that we can say this student is really and needs to be on this track, or I need to take it and they need to back up. And there's goals for them to do that. So like I really, so it's number 5, and I know you have it on the screen, but that personalized to make each student's educational experience responsive to their own talents, interests, and needs. And I know it takes a lot of work and you can't personalize 120 kids, but you can definitely say, hey, there's a group here and a group here. So hoping that we can continue this and even go further.
Absolutely. For me, I've read these quotes a few times, and they stood out differently to me today than in other times that I've read them, just because of where we are in the world. And number 9 was one for me today that really stuck. It starts with students' time and attention might be the most valuable resource for a student's education. Learning simply cannot occur without them. And I believe those words have never been truer. And while we could see it face to face in the classroom, it looks a little bit different in this virtual or concurrent space, but it's still just as needed now.
I agree. And I think, so quote 11 has always been one of my favorite quotes. I've seen these a few times as well. But it says, toward the end, these findings suggest the value of an approach where students regularly engage with educators, even if technology takes responsibility for some of the individualization of content and pacing. And I think so often people worry or expect technology to somehow be able to replace what a teacher is doing. And I think the magic is when you can use it to make what a teacher's doing more efficient, but that teacher-student interaction is still, the heart of learning and the heart of what we need to do as educators. So I like that this brings this together. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, the North Carolina Every Student Succeeds Act identifies 4 pillars of personalized learning. And the quotes we just read pull from some of the research that was done around what's effective in personalized learning. And that's what helped to inform these 4 pillars. And so the first pillar that they identify is the idea of a learner profile. And this can look different in different situations, but it's the idea that we have a record somehow of each student's strengths, weaknesses, preferences, and goals. And so it might be something that incorporates both their academic information and non-academic information, like what's their family structure, what are their hobbies and interests, what are their goals outside of the classroom. In Wake County, one really good example of this that we've seen are digital portfolios. A lot of times students are able to capture that information in a digital portfolio. But teachers have all kinds of other ways of capturing this information. A lot of times teachers might begin the year with a learner profile, like an all about me sheet. And then the trick is keeping that information updated and revisiting it to use it to inform the instruction throughout the school year. The second pillar that they identify is this idea of individualized learning paths. And that might be kind of what first comes to mind for a lot of people when we think about personalized learning. We might go straight to those individualized paths. But that's the idea that students are learning maybe at their own pace or in their own way, choosing from different options that meet their needs or meet different modalities of instruction. And some common examples of this might be something like a choice board or a menu that teachers are using. I know I've seen some good choice boards and some good playlists in this blended environment. For teachers that are teaching concurrently, sometimes maybe they're doing some station rotations in their classroom or able to translate some of those things online. Competency-based progression is similar to mastery-based learning, this idea that we're letting students progress as they demonstrate competency from one objective to another. And that can be micro or macro. So it might be within a day students are able to move ahead, or within a unit of instruction, or it might be within the whole school year. Single subject acceleration would be an example of that on a macro level, where they can move between courses as they're ready. And then flexible learning environments, I think, is probably the one we have the most experience with recently. And I think a lot of times people used to think of this pillar and they would think of like flexible furniture, right? Flexible seating in a classroom, but it's really a lot more than that. It's how you're using the resources flexibly to meet the students' needs. So how are you using access to the teacher? What does that look like? And when we're doing online virtual learning and in-person learning, we know that's had to look different. Maybe we're doing office hours. Maybe we're doing some targeted instruction with small groups. Maybe we're recording some of the lessons that we're using. So that's an example of a flexible learning environment. How are we using time in a flexible way? Maybe students are working at their own pace on things. Maybe students are working in small groups or rotating between activities. How are we using things like scaffolds and anchor charts to support that independent learning for students when they need to? Even something as simple as, passwords for the digital tools they're using, how are we helping them capture that and know where to access that? So all of those things come under that flexible learning environment idea. So what we'd like to do moving forward is we're going to take a deeper look at each of these pillars. We have some examples we've put together. And we're going to work on completing a Jamboard together to take a closer look. So for example, in a moment, I'll show you a slide that has some examples for learner profile. And we'll ask you to add to this Jamboard, what are some helpful practices from your example that you notice? And then where might you be seeing some of this in your building already, right? And it may be early stages, it may be really advanced. It's a spectrum, just like any kind of instructional change that we're using. But I'm confident all 4 of these things, there's already some progress in your school. And I would love to hear what you're seeing and what that looks like. And we can share among one another as well.
And I would like to add that if you're doing this with us asynchronously, we would like you to do the same thing. So click through the links and then add some thoughts to those Jamboards as you're going as well.
So the first pillar, just as a reminder, is this idea of a learner profile to represent each student's strengths, weaknesses, preferences, and goals. And this helps students start to self-reflect, set goals, advocate for their own needs, and monitor their progress. Another great example of this that comes to mind is like a data notebook. I know a lot of teachers are supporting students to track progress that way. And so we have some examples linked here. If you will choose one example, you can kind of hover your mouse over it on the slide, and we'll give you just a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to kind of go in, skim over and examine that example, and then we'll come back together to discuss it with the Jamboard. All right, so I know you may not have had time to read the whole example or watch the whole video, but let's go ahead and start sharing some of the things you've noticed on the learner profile Jamboard. So again, to find that link, if you'll go back to slide number 9, there's a link here on slide 9 for you to open the Jamboard. And you'll be able to add a sticky note here with a helpful practice you've noticed and or examples of where you might have seen this within your own school community. Thank you for that example. I think that's really powerful for staff sometimes to be able to build their own learning profile, to practice something before they have to do it with students. And I agree, I've seen some great examples out there of staff digital portfolios. And I think sometimes that really adds some meaning to the practice for staff. They see the purpose of it beyond just one more initiative to do with students. All right, so let's take a look at pillar number 2. Competency-based progression. So we'll do the same thing here. I'll give you a few minutes to take a look at one of these examples. And then we'll come back to the Jamboard to share, and we'll have those same 2 questions. What are some helpful practices that you notice, and where might you already be seeing this in your school community?
As you're reading, if you want, you can capture your thoughts too on the Jamboard. It's on slide 2. If you slide over to the next one, as you read, you can capture your thoughts there. I think that must do, may do is a nice way to really divide it up, especially in this learning environment, making it very clear to what students must complete is helpful. And a choice board can be as simple as that. You have your must-dos, and then you have the things that you may do afterwards.
I agree. I was teaching high school and I saw must do, may do for the first time with elementary examples, but my high school students loved it as well. I think it's motivating to them ooh, what may I do? Gives them a little more autonomy, and they enjoy that sense of choice in their own learning. All right, so let's move along to take a look at the next pillar of personalized learning, which is this idea of individualized learning paths. And as I mentioned before, this might be the most common one that we think of, but it allows students to set and manage their personal academic goals. A variety of instructional approaches and curriculum materials give students choice, and the teacher helps students make informed decisions. So the magic might come in the last part of that description, actually, that the student's not just willy-nilly choosing anything, but they have a purpose, they have some intention behind those choices that they're making. So I'll give you a few minutes to look over these examples. And again, if you'll share your thoughts on the Jamboard on slide 3, we can talk a little bit more in a few minutes. You have about 2 minutes left for this pillar, so if you want to take some time to share your thoughts on the Jamboard, this would be a good time to move in that direction. Thinking about helpful practices from the example or things you're already seeing in your community.
I saw this one in action recently in a 3rd grade classroom where a teacher was using playlist, and the way that she had structured it was that the students had 2 or 3 things that they were doing independently. So everyone was on the Google Meet, but she sent them to work on their playlist, and they were doing those things independently. And then when they hit the spot that said, "See your teacher," she would jump into a breakout room with the student, have a little conference with them about where they were, and then jump back to the main room. And then they could continue their work. So she was still using this. She was a virtual academy teacher, and she was using the breakout rooms as a spot to meet with a student or a small group of students in order to have those conferences and meet those students' needs. And the other students were still working, and it was a 3rd grade class, so she wasn't having them jump off of the Meet and then jump back on like maybe an older student would be able to do, but she was just having them go through and practice the things that they knew how to do. And she had lots of scaffolds in there, so videos with her voice, so that they could listen and watch her doing the things as a review. And I thought that was a really nice example of what this could look like in a pathway type format.
And I think one comment I see here is feeling confined to the curriculum, and that's something we've heard in a variety of contexts before. And I think kind of the magic is, so how do you stay true to the curriculum, the essence of the curriculum, or like thinking about EL, how do you stay true to those 4 T's that they say, these are non-negotiable, but then beyond those 4 T's, you can still individualize for your students and make those connections. And it does, I think part of it is being really comfortable with the curriculum. Like you almost have to teach it a couple times before you feel comfortable enough with it to make those adjustments. But I think we are starting to see some really great examples of that in practice as teachers are a little more familiar with the curriculum now that they've used it for a few years. So I'm always,
on to that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm always looking for great examples of that. So if you have teachers that are doing that work, please let us know. We love to see and hear what's happening.
Yeah, to add on to that, I feel like there are sometimes so many things in the curriculum that teachers can sort of manipulate around and change the format of how they look. So elementary school EL has the all block. And if they just start maybe with the all block and use this idea of individualized learning paths, that might be a good entry point. So where are there enough materials that are already written in the curriculum that they could change the structure a little bit to make it more accessible, even if it's just little things to start with?
And one more idea along those lines, if teachers are feeling like there's a pretty structured curriculum, pacing might be the place they can start. So could they organize those activities in a way that lets students move at their own pace, even if they're really using the same activities? Sometimes that's kind of an easier starting point for teachers to think about. All right, so let's move on to the final pillar to take a look at some examples. And this is flexible and learning environments. The setting provides support and structure adaptable for students working to meet learning goals. Access to staff, space, time, and resources reflects a responsiveness to individual student needs. And I know we are seeing this one all over the place right now, so I'm excited to hear what ideas you have to share, but there's some nice examples here on the slide too. So I'll give you a couple minutes to dive into those and share your thoughts on that final slide on the Jamboard. So we have about 2 minutes left for this pillar if you'll move toward sharing some ideas on the Jamboard, things you're seeing that might be helpful or things you're already seeing in your school community. You know, one thing I've talked with some folks about recently with students learning virtually is just the use of timers. Like teachers either setting a timer on their screen to share with students, we're going to take a 10-minute break and they can check back in. Or I was talking with a colleague and her son, who's an elementary school student, has started using their Alexa device at their house to set his own timer so he knows when to jump on Google Meet when it's time to start his next session. So sometimes it doesn't even have to be like a large effort. Is just something small to help our students better manage their time or make more flexible use of those resources that can really make a difference.
I think that the example of highlighting small group work, setting those norms to where students know how to work with each other in a virtual environment or in a combination of environments, to have that small group still happen to where the teacher is not the only holder of all the knowledge is really impactful.
All right, so I realize we could have spent much longer looking at these different examples of the pillars, but the good news is you can go back to look at the ones that were interesting to you, or if you're joining us asynchronously, you can take your time to examine examples that seem relevant to your context. But we wanted to take some time to look at what might be some connections between these pillars. So thinking about, we've kind of provided you with a guiding question that relates to the different competencies for leaders, the different competencies identified there. So thinking about either how time, resources, and access might support this personalized learning, how we could engage all learners in personalized learning. Sometimes something might make sense from our lens, but from a parent lens, it looks different or it sounds different. How can we model these and work with staff and students, or how they might work within our vision, our overall vision for teaching and learning. So does anybody have any thoughts you'd like to share? Not around all 4 questions, but do any one of those questions kind of speak to you or spark any ideas you'd like to share with the group? One practice I saw shared earlier that I thought speaks to this stakeholder engagement is the student-led conferences that you mentioned. That seems to me like it might be an opportunity to have conversations with several different groups of stakeholders, students, parents or families, teachers. So if you want to speak a little more about that or just think about how that might relate to that community question there at the bottom right of the slide.
I also feel like you guys have shared a potential entry point into each of these 4 pillars. So if you're not doing one specific one in your school, maybe you have heard a possible entry point for teachers in your buildings and sparked some ideas or some conversation about where to begin.
All right, so the question that we'll leave you with as we work toward closing out the session is, there's a lot going on right now out of necessity that's personalized learning for our students. Sometimes in a really high quality way, sometimes just in a sheer survival mode, right? But either way, it's happening. So what might be some of those practices we're engaging in right now that are worth carrying forward when we return back to more face-to-face instruction to keep learning personalized? What are some of the things we've practiced or learned from virtual learning that might help us actually improve the personalization in our physical classrooms moving forward?
And if you have an idea or a thought that you'd like to drop in the chat or unmute yourself, yep. Thanks for sharing. So we got in the chat, the choice menu idea is one that they'd like to start to carry forward.
So I did want to mention on the next slide are some references for further learning. These are also the references where we pulled the quotes for the initial activity. So in all your spare time, you're welcome to peruse these resources, or if there's something that particularly interests you, these are good starting points to look back. And I'm seeing we're getting some more responses in the chat. Jenny, is there anything you wanted to lift up from the chat?
Yeah, this one says mastery checks to provide enrichment and intervention. And I think that's a great starting point of where to go throughout that spectrum of learning.
Absolutely. All right,
so a few reminders as we wrap up. Oh, sorry. So if you would, please complete the feedback form. And remember, this part is just for us to have feedback moving forward if we do a session like this again. If you would like the 0.1 CEUs, you will need to go back to the Canvas course and complete the reflection piece. And then the CEUs will be awarded after March 31st. So you can go back to the reflection piece in the Canvas course to get your CEUs for this. Also, you have the opportunity to watch the other 4 sessions that you missed during the 9 o'clock hour. But we're glad that you came and spent some time with us. And throughout the day, you know, there are more sessions, so we hope that you join us. And even if you can't join us in person, feel free to come back throughout the year through March 31st and keep learning. So.
And thank you for your participation. I know it was a small session, so I hope you didn't feel like you were on the spot, but we enjoyed your discussion and the examples you shared this morning. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.